Today, I'm joined by Gazelle Summe, Director of Portfolio and Wealth Advisory at BBR Partners, to discuss the movie, The Talented Mr. Ripley. Against the backdrop of fictional Mongibello and 1950s Riviera Chic, Gazelle and I discuss some proactive steps that can be taken to protect, help, and educate trust beneficiaries. Should Dickie be permitted to serve as trustee of his own trust? Should Tom have kept Dickie's rings? We explore these questions and more. And as Marge Sherwood would say, why do I think there's never been a Ripley rainy day? Welcome to The Verdict, Estate Planning Through Film, brought to you by the Private Client Group at Farella, Braun, and Martel. I'm Hans Young, a family wealth partner at Farella. Through this podcast, my guests and I will provide an entertaining look at family wealth and estate planning topics through well-known Hollywood movies. Each episode will focus on a single movie as we discuss fun facts, review our favorite scenes, and engage in thought-provoking discussions of real-world legal issues. And lastly, do you agree with our verdict? Is the movie a guilty pleasure or just not guilty? Again, welcome to The Verdict, Estate Planning Through Film. I'm delighted to have Gazelle Summe as my guest on the podcast today. Gazelle is a director of portfolio and wealth advisory at BBR Partners in San Francisco. She works with clients to develop their overall financial strategy, manage their investments, and integrate their investment, tax, and estate planning into a cohesive wealth management plan. Gazelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Hans. Happy to be here.
I'm excited for our discussion today because this is a movie that you and I both really love and appreciate. So many great, just classic performances. As I was rewatching it, it provides us with the perfect backdrop to discuss some common issues that we face with a lot of our high net worth and ultra high net worth clients. But before we get to the estate planning issues we want to highlight, let's board our 1950s ocean liner, head to Mongibello, and start with some fun facts about the movie. So the movie released on December 25th, apparently Christmas Day, 1999, which is hard to believe, boasted one of the most talented casts of the late 90s. Matt Damon and Gwyneth Paltrow had already won Academy Awards. Cate Blanchett and Philip Seymour Hoffman would later go on to win them. The movie really launched Jude Law to worldwide fame. The movie was a box office success, grossing $138 million worldwide on a budget of just $40 million. It is based on the 1955 novel by Patricia Highsmith and was directed by Anthony Minghella, who also directed The English Patient, I think, which won 9 Oscars, including Best Director. I didn't actually see this movie in the theaters. I was thinking back. I think I watched it on DVD, which of course dates me to a degree. I immediately loved it. And remember asking myself, why isn't Jude Law a huge star? Because he did so well. Everyone did well in this, but he at the time stood out because at least I kind of knew some of the other actors. Clearly, Hollywood asked that question as well because he immediately starred in Enemy at the Gates and AI, both in 2001, just shortly after this movie released. Do you remember when you watched this movie for the first time, and why is it one of your favorite movies?
I think I watched it for the first time in high school. It must have been via DVD. I can't remember if, we rented it through one of those Blockbuster videos, or maybe it was Netflix at the time, around 1999. But I agree. I just absolutely love this film. It's probably one of my favorite films of all time. Like you said, an amazing cast of late 90s actors. The sets, filmed in Italy and the south of France are just so beautifully captured. Mm-hmm. And I really think that this movie does such a great job of capturing the carefree joie de vivre of youth and European travel, but then juxtaposing it against a very macabre and dark plot. It starts out so idyllic and then sort of quietly evolves into something very unsettling.
Yeah. No, it's the scenery. It just makes you want to get on a plane and just go straight to Italy and just live Dickie's lifestyle. A couple other fun facts here. Sadly, Mongibello is not a real place. It's a fictional town created for the novel, which is, of course, what the movie's based on. Director Anthony Minghella originally wanted Tom Cruise for the role of Tom Ripley, but then he saw Good Will Hunting, which came out a couple years before, and he decided to cast Matt Damon apparently Leonardo DiCaprio and Christian Bale were also considered for the role. I think Matt Damon was perfect for this. I think the other actors we just named, it would have made Tom a little bit too cool to start with. I think Matt Damon just brought just enough uncool for the role and just the awkwardness. And it really makes that transition from him, kind of being that innocent sort of, hey, I just want to, although it's not that innocent, I guess, right from the start, because he doesn't really know Dickie at all and didn't go to Princeton. But it sort of makes his transformation, I think, to this sort of sociopathic killer at the end probably a little bit more believable than maybe some of the other actors. Jude Law learned to play the saxophone, and Matt Damon learned to play the piano for the film. Matt Damon sang the song My Funny Valentine. And then I saw Jude Law fell backwards and broke a rib while filming the murder scene on the boat. So those are my fun facts. Any others that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I read that this is how, Cate Blanchett and Philip Seymour Hoffman originally became friends. They're in supporting roles and they both had a lot of downtime while they were filming. So they ended up spending a lot of time hanging out together, doing sightseeing and visiting museums. So I thought that was neat. And then I listened to a more recent interview with Jude Law of him reflecting on, the film. And he admitted he didn't appreciate how lucky the cast and the crew were at the time to be filming on site in Italy. I think he realized after the fact that not all film sets are that beautiful, and you really don't get to do a lot of on location filming nowadays. So I thought that was neat too.
The late, great Philip Seymour Hoffman. I probably had seen him in other movies, but this is definitely one of his sort of classic performances. He's got so little screen time too. It's not even like he's in a big part of the movie. And we'll get to favorite scene in a second, but I mean, you could almost say almost every scene he's in is my favorite scene.
He is incredible. He's just got this cruel sense of humor about him. He sort of reminds me of someone I know personally, but I agree. He brings a smile to my face in every scene.
Yeah. And then in terms of filming on location, I mean, so many movies now, and, one, to save on costs, I guess, but two, also, I don't know. I mean, I think the boasting just where CGI has gone. I mean, so many movies are done in front of a green screen now, and it's kind of refreshing to see a movie that, as far as I can tell, almost everything was on location, and it looked beautiful. So definitely added to it, I think. Yeah, let's get to favorite scenes. So I broke this down. I'm going to give us some contenders to just choose from here. I broke them down between, I think we start with some New York scenes. The majority of the movie happens in Italy and in Europe, but let's just run through them here. So the New York scenes, I've got Tom, who is at the time working as a laboratory attendant and a pianist. He's recruited by Dickie's father, Herbert Greenleaf, who owns a shipping company. And that's how this whole thing starts. There's also scenes of him researching Dickie and his love for jazz, which, I mean, really highlight, I think, right from the get-go. I mean, something's not quite right with him. I mean, he's pretending to know Dickie from Princeton just because he had that jacket on, which I don't even know. I mean, it's unclear to me whether he intentionally wore the jacket. I mean, it sounds like, we see him giving it back to, I think, the pianist who had hurt his wrist or something like that. So it's possible that it was happenstance that, he just chanced upon the Greenleaf family, but he certainly takes advantage of it. And then we've got all the Italy scenes. So again, Tom being very deceitful right from the start. He fakes his chance encounter with Dickie and Marge on the beach. There's that scene.
That scene's so funny. I mean, like you said earlier, Matt Damon is that perfect balance of sort of dorky, awkward,
mm-hmm.
and that scene really embodies that. I love that scene.
I think I've read or heard him in an interview, saying that he was very, very nervous to be in that scene because, of course, he has to wear the Speedo. And,
the neon yellow Speedo.
Yeah, it's a neon yellow Speedo. The lesson here, if someone comes up to you on the beach in a yellow Speedo and tells you that they know you and you clearly don't know them, you probably beware. So there's also the scene where this is where we see sort of Tom and Dickie kind of bonding right away. Tom joins Dickie during the jazz club performance. Great for Tom in that he's bonding with Dickie. He didn't know Dickie at all. So I think this was probably like, wow, he lives this awesome lifestyle, probably completely opposite than the lifestyle that Tom's accustomed to. But unfortunately, it also fuels Tom's obsession with Dickie and this lifestyle. So even if, perhaps had he gone there not expecting or intending to do all these terrible things, this was sort of the catalyst for his obsession with this character or this friend.
Yeah, just to touch on that scene at the jazz club a little bit more, it's iconic in my mind. You know, every time I watch it, I can't help but smile. And apparently, the director was inspired to include it after attending a performance of that song, Tu vo fa l'americano, in Italy. And he added it just a few weeks before shooting began, as kind of a fun fact. But it's such a fun and a lively scene. You know, you can't help but smile when you watch it. But it's also a really important sort of inflection point or turning point for the film where, you know, as you're suggesting, the plot starts to reveal more about Dickie and Tom. We really don't know much about them up until this point.
Right.
And then I think it also highlights that music for both of them represents the vehicle for each of them escaping their social status. Mm-hmm. So for Tom, you know, classical music represents his longing for upward mobility. And for Dickie, I think the more frenetic nature of jazz embodies his desire to sort of rebel and have freedom from the responsibilities that come with his privilege.
For sure. Yeah, no, jazz is this sort of spontaneous genre. It embodies Dickie's lifestyle. I mean, he's sort of hopping, you know, just island hopping from one place to another. And as you mentioned, you know, Tom, I don't think even by the end of the movie, we know much about his background. But obviously, he doesn't come from money. I think, yeah, having classical music as sort of a window into, like you said, a lifestyle that he's probably got no experience with is really important. So great points there. We also have the scene where Freddie meets up with Dickie. Tom becomes, unfortunately for him, the third wheel. There's probably a couple of scenes in that, but it's just so funny seeing Tom just completely dejected at that point because, you know, he meets someone who I think Dickie might initially have liked Tom because he is so unlike himself, right? Reserved. And, you know, obviously, I don't think Tom comes off as coming from a wealthy lifestyle. And I think Dickie probably knows that. But Freddie is sort of equal with Dickie, you know, equally kind of spontaneous, equally crazy, probably comes from, you know, a lot of wealth as well. And so, again, Tom becomes the third wheel. There's a scene where things start to shift. Tom wears Dickie's clothes and dances in his room. I think this is a really important scene, even though it's brief. But one, it's funny seeing Matt Damon do that because at that point, we don't really know much about him either. And it shows this, like, he is so infatuated with that lifestyle that he quite literally, right? I mean, it's also a metaphor. He's quite literally later in the movie going to be putting on Dickie's clothes and assuming his identity. But you know, this is where we see Dickie starting to tire of Tom a little bit. He's not happy to find him like this, and it's not going to go well. Cracks start to show. There's a scene where Dickie, Marge, Freddie, and Tom all go sailing, and then Freddie's got that great line. He's like, Tommy, you know, how's the peeping? And then there's we're getting some key pivotal scenes here where there's Tom murders Dickie on the boat. Tom murders Freddie Miles in Rome when Freddie comes to his apartment, and Tom is at that point, you know, fully living out Dickie's lifestyle. Tom attends an opera with Meredith. This is Meredith Logue, played by Cate Blanchett, and he has that sort of unexpected encounter with Marge and Peter. Marge confronts Tom after discovering that he has Dickie's rings. Maybe if you're trying to not get caught for committing murder and terrible crimes, don't keep key pieces of evidence with you at all times. I mean, this seemed like just why did he keep Dickie's rings? Obviously, you know, I understand from his character standpoint, you know, he's infatuated with this character and really wanted to become him. But yeah, just not a good choice, not a good decision by Tom.
I think that scene where Marge confronts him in the bathroom, and then he sort of slowly backs her into the front door as she's attempting to leave. It's so intense. And it really just has you on the edge of your seat, you know, kind of wondering, is this going to come to a head? Is there going to be another murder?
I think, had Peter not interrupted and arrived, I think he would have murdered. I think he would have murdered Marge there.
I think so too.
He had the razor blade to the point, and he was obviously, you know, he gripped it so tightly that his hand was cut and he was bleeding through his robe. So yeah, I think it's probably safe to say something would have happened to Marge there. So, and then there's the finale on the ocean liner to Greece where, you know, it seems like Tom may have gotten away with all these terrible crimes, but then of course he ends up deciding to murder Peter because Peter catches him with Meredith and sees them kissing and is like, wait, what's going on here? And Tom just making a lot of just rash, really bad decisions one after another. I feel like he probably could have talked Peter down a little bit, maybe done something a little bit more crafty. I think just gut reaction of killing him was probably not a good idea. I can't imagine him not getting caught after this if the movie had continued, you know?
Agreed. But it made for sort of a shocking ending.
Yes. So obviously we went through a lot of scenes, but of those, any one of those stands out as your favorite?
I think the two, you know, that you touched on, the jazz scene, that is definitely my favorite. Whenever I think of this movie, I think of that scene, and it makes me, you know, just love it and want to watch it again. And then also the scene where Tom is sort of confronting Marge and slowly, you know, backing her into the front door. She's accusing him of murdering Dickie. I think that just has such a intense, such a high level of intensity to it. It's what makes the movie suspenseful. Yeah. Yeah. No, those are great scenes. I could choose any one of these. I think I'll go with the scene where Tom murders Freddie. You know, a tragic scene and also high intensity, but Freddie's just so good. It's mostly before he gets killed when he's confronting Tom. And I think Freddie's he's a smart guy. I think he's putting it together that something's off. I don't know that he would have assumed that Tom had murdered Dickie at this point, but I think he knows something's off. And just, he's going around the apartment and it's clearly not Dickie's style. And he's just insulting the decorations, just the whole thing. So I'll pick that one. But yeah, I could have gone with any one of these. And I think my runner-up is, Tom wearing Dickie's clothes and dancing. I think that's just just so funny. Well, let's move to our estate planning opportunities category. You know, we could have gone a number of different directions with this movie, but because a central part of what we do when we counsel and assist our high and ultra high net worth clients involves trusts, I wanted to highlight common client concerns regarding trust beneficiaries, who are typically the children or descendants of our clients. I think this movie and its characters are perfect because it illustrates some of our client concerns. And I think also offers us different types of beneficiaries. And obviously these are stereotypes as we go through this. You know, our actual clients and their actual children or descendants or beneficiaries have very unique needs. But, you know, this movie, I think, offers at least some examples of maybe extreme examples, I think, of some scenarios that we often hear about, or at least concerns that we hear about. So to start, we know the Greenleaf family is wealthy because Herbert, Dickie's father, runs a large shipping company. I mean, even the last name Greenleaf, you know, suggests that at least for this family, you know, money does grow on trees. So I think using their family and some of these characters as an example is a great place to start because our high net worth and ultra high net worth clients, obviously they run family businesses. They do have children either living abroad sometimes or living very extravagant lifestyles. And so this concern about protecting beneficiaries comes up. And I wanted to talk first about, you know, who are we protecting beneficiaries from? And I think what we see often is from our clients is just trying to protect beneficiaries from themselves. And here I wanted to focus on Dickie's character, to some degree, Freddie as well, but we don't know a whole lot about Freddie, and he's really just in a few scenes. So I think we'll mostly talk about Dickie here. But Dickie kind of represents, I think, most parents' worst nightmare, in that he's living this extravagant lifestyle, no obvious objective in life other than pleasure, hanging out with friends. A little bit about his character that we find out, I think, is he's an only child. We know he doesn't want to return to New York to his father's shipyard. And that's, you know, he doesn't want anything to do with the family business, basically. We've seen that in probably various forms before with our clients. He says he'll never take over his father's company, which is something I think from, you know, we won't focus too much on Herbert today, but I think from Herbert's perspective, he probably should get that message and do some succession planning and do some planning of his own, taking into account that reality rather than trying to force Dickie into this role. I think Dickie's character is really
it's highlighted by, he doesn't want to go to New York, but not just because his mother has leukemia, for crying out loud. And he still doesn't want to go back.
That is an interesting observation. And I would even argue that Dickie's not necessarily living an extravagant lifestyle, but he's just not living a productive lifestyle.
Right.
And I think that is a fear, of our clients too, is that, significant wealth, if shared with their children too soon, might demotivate them.
Absolutely.
And, sort of take the fire out from under them in pursuing a productive lifestyle.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about a productive lifestyle a little bit more through another character. But yeah, that's absolutely right. In fact, Herbert says that Dickie's off, quote, spending his allowance, unquote. He's got a sailboat. I mean, it's not a big boat, so maybe unsure how he has that at the start. It's named Bird after his love for jazz and a jazz performer. He goes on ski trips to Cortina. We know he had an expensive Ivy League education. He went to Princeton. Doesn't appear to have taken his studies seriously, though. I think Tom on the beach is pretending that he went to Princeton as well. He says Princeton was a fog, Dickie says. Dickie says about himself, he can't spell, write, or type well. He says it's the privilege of a first-class education. And, that's a key point, too, because it's because that Dickie doesn't write his own letters in his own handwriting. It makes it all the more easy. And I think if Tom wasn't planning this from the start, I think the ideas and the gears in his head started to turn at that point, because he realizes he can literally forge letters just by learning Dickie's signature rather than needing to learn his entire handwriting style. So just a plot point there. Dickie also has a relationship with Silvana, right? So who we discover after she tragically drowns herself, that she was pregnant with Dickie's child. Apparently she went to Dickie for help. He said no. But I think the qualities that he has in terms of potential productivity, right? He does play the saxophone. He appreciates jazz, the arts, I guess this could represent. He doesn't hold a formal job or vocation that we can see from the movie. I think there is something there. And again, we'll kind of get more into the details of, what defines or how a client would want to define a productive lifestyle for a beneficiary. But I think Dickie's got some things there. I mean, we know that towards the end there, if he's to be believed, he and Marge were supposed to be married. I think Herbert says at some point they want grandchildren. Doesn't every grandparent deserve a grandchild? So it's unclear. Obviously, we never find out. Dickie unfortunately makes decisions. He allows Tom into his life, and tragically his life is ended prematurely. But I think he sort of represents for me, I think, again, in an extreme way, all the things that a lot of our clients are most concerned about when they think about a trust and, making trust distributions. And as you said, maybe releasing trust funds, or even the idea of the trust or the existence of a trust earlier than maybe they should. Any other comments about Dickie? I think we'll get to some potential steps that clients can take because they have these concerns. But I think he's a pretty good representation of sort of that trust beneficiary that many parents just say, wow, I can't imagine giving them more money or letting them have full discretion over their trust because of what they might do.
Yeah, I think Dickie's character is sort of inherently trusting, maybe, of other people too, just in how, he sort of takes Tom up on his friendship out of the blue.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, maybe clients or their children, can sometimes be wary of if they have money, is standing out and sort of becoming a target.
Yeah. Continuing on this idea of protecting beneficiaries from themselves, Dickie's this extreme example of sort of the list of things you would prefer, I think, probably beneficiaries, don't do. I want to also focus on Meredith Logue's character. So this is Cate Blanchett. We actually don't know much about her, but the little bits we do know, I think it actually helps our discussion. She kind of just shows up, seemingly like with no agenda. Obviously she's there to move the plot points along. But I don't think her character actually existed in the book. I think she was written into the movie. And I think it seems pretty clear she was just there to kind of move the movie along. And of course, Tom's knowing her, leads to Peter's death. And maybe that's why they insert it there. But she's sort of, I don't know. I would say she's nothing. Doesn't appear to be doing anything destructive to others or to herself. But to something you said already, just appears sort of maybe unmotivated towards life. I mean, she does have a dialogue with Tom at one point, says, she's just, I think it was something to the effect of she's bored and it's hard meeting people. And it's so great that she meets other people because she thinks he's Dickie at that point. And I think her she's the heiress to I think it was a textile business. So I think she found comfort in meeting someone else, another heir to a lot of wealth. But again, she just seems unmotivated, maybe apathetic. Apathy would be the right way to describe this type of beneficiary who, again, isn't doing anything destructive to themselves or others, but maybe just isn't doing anything productive overall.
Yeah, she also makes a comment in conversation with Tom at some point when she thinks that he's Dickie. I think it's probably the same conversation on the steps. Something to the effect of, like you say, it's nice to meet someone else. And also sort of like shirking her own wealth, like kind of looking for freedom from it,
right,
not being bogged down by it. So there is that theme of, sort of these wealthy children, her and Dickie trying to get away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a concern I've seen among clients with someone like Meredith or that type of beneficiary is that there's a fear that if they have too much discretion over their trust, perhaps she would have given all of it away. I mean, there's some of these beneficiaries might decide they'll get involved with a charity and suddenly that money is gone, which, is for a good cause. But from our clients who are often the parents' standpoint, who have, worked their entire lives to build the wealth, sometimes it's not in their best interest or the family line's best interest if a beneficiary suddenly decides to do that. And so are there things that to put in place in a trust to protect beneficiaries? Again, in Dickie's example, maybe he would be spending it on himself and just kind of frivolously. Meredith might be, and again, we're reading into her character a little bit, but maybe she's the type who would spend it not on herself only. Maybe it would be for a good cause, but at the end of the day, it might be against what the family or the client's wishes are. So I think she's a great character to sort of represent that type of beneficiary. And let's move on now. The other common concern is, well, let's not just protect the beneficiary from themselves. Let's also protect them from others. You kind of alluded to it earlier. Sometimes beneficiaries can be trusting. Often our clients' children who they're adults, but they're young adults, in their 20s sometimes. And if they have, a certain amount of discretion over their trust and over the assets, there's this fear that some third party is going to come along, either within the family or outside of the family, that's going to take advantage of them. And this is where good old Tom Ripley comes in. He's a great springboard for a discussion about protection from others, because that's exactly what he is. He comes out of the woodwork and, preys on Dickie's family entirely. Obviously, he affects these other characters too, who are in Dickie's sphere of influence. But other ways that this sort of the other comes in, clients are concerned about significant others. So it's not always friends. It's often significant others, spouses who marry into the family, because there's a fear that, while things may be going well now, what happens if they divorce? Is there going to be, is it going to be a messy divorce with litigation, in which case there could be a claim here in California that some of these assets should be the divorcing spouse's assets as well, and not just the separate property of our client's children. And then just other, quote unquote, bad influences. And so Tom Ripley,
creditors.
I think, creditors, exactly. Right. So I think there's this idea that we need to protect beneficiaries from these third parties. And I think Tom represents all of those. And of course, he's an extreme example of that. I think there's a lot less that Tom could do that would also be harmful or outside of just murdering and stealing from these beneficiaries. But we know that Tom was an only child as well. I think they even make a comment at some point. So he's got a situation that lends itself to where these became sort of prime targets for him. He doesn't come from wealth. But again, he's an extreme example of it. But I think for us in our discussion, he's a good representation of, outsiders or third parties who might take advantage of the beneficiary, or as you mentioned, even creditors who will have a vested interest in the beneficiary's assets.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't agree more. I think Tom, we touched on this a little bit, but Tom starts out sort of opportunistically taking advantage of his situation, and then becomes more calculated as the film goes on, once he recognizes, Dickie's wealth and the opportunity there for him to sort of slide in. Yeah.
Yeah. And we don't know enough about him to see his character arc, really, whether he was always like this. I mean, for all we know, this was, the fourth time he'd done this to somebody and just hadn't been caught. But I think, I mean, if we're to assume that he started a certain way as a character, he's probably evolving too. And I think he's devolving deeper and deeper as his obsession with Dickie and that lifestyle kind of grows. So we see him doing and taking more, like you say, more and more calculated steps, all for the, all for the worst. So with these concerns, right, protecting beneficiaries from themselves, from others, wanted to just quickly highlight some precautionary steps that clients can take, in an effort to protect them, protect beneficiaries. So the first is kind of really obvious, is just to name for these trusts, to name a third-party trustee, or if you've got the right type of trust, name a distribution advisor. Just someone other than the beneficiary who can provide oversight over trust distributions. I actually don't think Dickie is his own trustee. It sounds like he still does need to ask someone for money because he does suggest using Tom's expense money. I think Herbert had given him $1,000 to start as just to get to Italy and to pay for some things. Dickie does suggest using that to buy a car, which they do. So I don't know that, if he was his own trustee and he had the ability to authorize distributions sort of at his whim, would he have suggested, although $1,000 back in that time in the 1950s, especially, and then you got to convert it from US dollars, convert it to currency in Italy, it probably would have gone a long way. So maybe it was just opportunistic from Dickie's side, but unclear whether he was his own trustee or not. When Tom pretends to be Dickie, he was very easily able to forge a money order. So yeah, maybe it's unclear who is the trustee, but I think just as a start, Dickie's parents should have put in, if they didn't already, a third party as a trustee. Again, someone other than Dickie who can provide oversight over, what he's spending it on and how much he's taking out.
Exactly. I think, Dickie's parents really, should have zeroed in on finding someone trustworthy, with some experience with financial matters, someone that was capable of maybe being a mentor to Dickie. I think that's ideal when you're considering, who to bring on as a trustee. And also, someone that really understands your intentions as the grantor of the trust and also the needs of the beneficiaries and kind of help them navigate those conversations over time.
Yeah, that's a good point because, what might be a frivolous or unwise expenditure of money for one family may not be for another. And so someone who knows the family, I think, is the point, and also has some experience, as you mentioned, even better if you can marry those two skills, is knowing the family, but also having some expertise with assets. Herbert does have the right idea. I mean, we know Dickie's mother has leukemia, so I think she's off the hook for whatever decisions were made here. But one other aspect, in addition to having someone who knows the family, has expertise, another aspect of naming a third party that I often tell my clients is, if the answer is no to a requested trust distribution, and that's not always just the question is, can I get more money from the trust? But the bottom line is, if the answer from the parent to the beneficiary is no, or an answer that the beneficiary would not like or appreciate, it sometimes helps the beneficiary to receive that message from a third party, someone other than their own parents. We've all known, and maybe it's been us, who have taken actions just because parents have said to do something, we do the opposite, or not to do something and we do the opposite. So I think it sometimes helps just to have an objective third party in that equation so that Herbert himself, who Dickie clearly kind of despises, doesn't have to hear from directly. And Herbert had some of the right idea, right? He does send Tom to Italy because he must have felt this way, right? An objective third party can talk some sense into Dickie better than he and his wife can. It's just unfortunate that he chose a sociopath and a con artist rather than a trusted advisor or someone else acting in Dickie's best interest. So I think he had a good idea, but probably should have talked to one of us to get an even better idea. The other step that our clients can take is, and this would typically be put into the trust document itself, the trust agreement, or it can be in a letter of wishes that the grantors or trustors can write to a trustee or their beneficiaries. But it's providing trustees with clear guidelines on making or delaying trust distributions so that the trustee has some clear direction. So let's assume that Dickie does have some other trustee, but that clearly they felt okay funding Dickie's lifestyle, even while he was, being rather unproductive from, the typical standards. How much more helpful would it have been if that trustee had clear direction from Herbert and Emily, and they were still living. So in many instances, we're talking about when the clients and the parents and the trustors are deceased. It's important to have something the trustee can rely on to give them some guidance. Otherwise, they can't say no to something the trust doesn't clearly expressly prohibit. And so I think it's really important to take that step of, again, whether it's in the trust document itself or in a letter that you write to your loved ones or to the trustee, just making it very clear, spelling out what does it mean, for example, for a beneficiary to be productive. We keep mentioning this idea of this being a productive member of society. Clients should understand they can spell that out. You don't have to guess.
Does that mean holding a job, pursuing an education, being involved or volunteering in the community? Could that mean acting as a full-time caregiver for children?
Exactly.
Or sick or aging family member? Or does that just mean demonstrating some amount of financial responsibility?
Exactly. Yeah,
agreed. That can all be outlined.
Yeah, it's just great to outline that and get that out there, because without those clear guidelines, you're leaving the trustee in a position where they've got to use their own discretion. In some cases, that's desirable. You're setting them up for success, right? There's going to be this relationship between the trustee and the beneficiary long after, parents are deceased and they're gone. And you're avoiding this potential friction that can happen or this tension that can happen in that relationship. And we're not just talking about like personal tension so that, I don't personally like my trustee. We're talking about avoiding litigation and court action, because what trustees will often do if they're faced with a trust action that they don't have clear guidance for, and they're fearful for their own liability, they don't want to use their own discretion to make that decision, they can go to the court to ask for guidance, and they can petition the court for instructions. Sometimes there's nothing bad or wrong with that. But again, you're putting them in a position where, one of the key purposes of putting a trust in place to begin with in California is to avoid the probate court. And here, even with the trust, you're ending up with a situation where the trustee has to go to probate court anyway. And so that's something that, at least to the extent that you can try to avoid it, should be avoided.
To the extent the grantors or the settlors can also provide, the process or the expectation for evaluating the beneficiaries, like what documentation or proof or behaviors, does the trustee need to see to validate that they're being productive and that a distribution is okay. So I think even outlining that is helpful too. Just some practical guidelines for evaluating, what is allowable.
And every family is different. For certain families, you may have certain activities, even when it comes to, you mentioned education. I've seen trusts, and we've put in place trusts that define what grades need to be achieved in order to be productive. There's not a set number, right? If it's a GPA or if it's a certain number of credits earned, that's unique to every family. The point of our discussion today is less about defining exactly what those are supposed to be, but just kind of giving the thought, these proactive steps can be taken, and you're not left without recourse. Even though, these trusts are going to be in place for your beneficiaries long after you're deceased, you can do a lot of things now to sort of put everyone in the best position to succeed. I just wanted to also point out the other sort of terrible scenario that, we often see is beneficiaries who then, because there's not clear guidance, or maybe there is, but they don't like the answer, it's important to realize that beneficiaries can take the trustee to court and sue for a number of different causes of action. Perhaps they feel the trustees breached the fiduciary duty. We're talking about trustees in sort of the most ideal light, right? I don't want to ignore the fact that you do have instances where a bad trustee is in place and they've made poor decisions, and in some cases committed fraud or stolen money from the trust. The beneficiary does have recourse by being able to take that trustee to court, and then there's formal litigation between them. But for the sake of our discussion today, and in the context that we're discussing this, assuming that the trustee is a good trustee and is doing what they're supposed to do, having these guidelines hopefully avoids court action, whether it's litigation against the trustee or it's the trustees, resorting to going to court because they have no other guidance. I wanted to point out one more proactive step. If privacy is not a concern, which sometimes it is, we haven't really talked too much. I think I've highlighted, or we've made a mention of silent trusts, or, trusts that can be formed outside of California, for example. The notice provisions in California don't really permit this or allow this to be a reality. But in other jurisdictions where notices to trust beneficiaries are not as stringent or in some cases not required. You can create a silent trust. And so if privacy is not a concern, you can tell the beneficiaries about the trust, which some parents, again, don't want to do. And that's why silent trusts are used. I would say that educating beneficiaries about their trust and or the family business would be really wise. And doing that while, everyone's still alive, right? Parents are still here. They can involve them in meetings with their professional advisors. Something that I often suggest my clients do with their adult children is maybe an easy way to kind of walk them into this process is just have them join a meeting or two. Start having them see what it is like talking about investments for the trust, actions for the trust, what the trust agreement says. I've often had experiences with, and I'm sure you do too, where, clients' adult children, after their parents put them in touch with me, they have no idea what their trust says. If suddenly parents are gone because they've died, imagine how hard of a transition it's going to be for a beneficiary who maybe just discovered that they have this trust with all these assets in it, much less navigating all those complexities, hiring the right people to have assets invested and managed and making all these distribution decisions. I mean, there's a lot that's on that beneficiary that you're expecting them to learn and do. They will have to learn and do it at some point, or at least hire the right people to do it. But how much better if they could kind of get an advanced look at those issues while everyone's alive and well, and presumably getting along. Everyone's fine.
Right. I think that's such a great point. Building comfort and educating the beneficiaries along the way can really lead to sort of the best long-term outcome, because the trust assets are there, to really support them in their endeavors in life. I've seen instances where beneficiaries similarly, don't understand how the trust works or what it can be used for. And, granted, they have professional advisors to help them with that. But just having a basic understanding of what it's there for and how it can support them can really, open it up as a tool for positive things in a beneficiary's life.
And I think even having the beneficiary understand and meet some of these other professional advisors is important, because I've often seen it's overwhelming because they didn't realize it was all kept in this sort of black box for them because they were, for whatever reason, believed not to be mature enough to handle, or maybe parents were busy building the business and didn't involve them. But they just don't understand how many other people are involved and helped, their parents, operate all of these things. And so now all of a sudden they think it's all falling on them. It's important for them to know who some of the key advisors are.
Agreed. And I think that education can be done without necessarily having to reveal the total dollars held in the trust. You can educate them on the qualities of the trust and the purpose and the family values and what it's to be used for and sort of the reason behind all of it without necessarily having to show them all the numbers on a page.
Yeah. I made the point earlier about having this objective third party, but I always encourage clients to use their advisors as that buffer between them, again, if they need it, between them and their children or descendants, to have the tougher conversations. Because this education process can seem daunting, right? Clients themselves often, the trust and the issues and the tax issues that you and I face are difficult and complex. I think it's important for clients to understand they don't have to understand everything, so then they can turn around and educate their children or the beneficiaries. They can really leverage their advisors to have these conversations. And so, yeah, I think educating beneficiaries, again, this assumes that privacy is not a concern, that revealing, even if it's not certainly not the full extent of the assets, but even revealing the trust itself and that there are assets, assuming that's a reality and that's practical, then I think the education component is really, really key. And for our discussion today, it kind of rounds out these proactive steps that parents and clients can take if they have these concerns over their trust beneficiaries. I want to move on now to one more character. We've really talked about all these sort of negative scenarios, protecting beneficiaries from themselves, from others, but it ignores this sort of what probably we see more of in our day-to-day, which is that trusts, as you mentioned, are there to assist beneficiaries. And that often does happen. It's very common to see trusts and families with trusts that operate very smoothly. I don't want to leave that out and only focus on the negative, but how can trusts assist beneficiaries? One of the ways we mentioned is, just defining who a productive member of society is. And I think for me, I think Marge, her character, was probably the best representation of this. Is, she maybe has a an unwise relationship with Dickie because, he's off. I mean, he's cheating on her. He's just doesn't seem all that focused on her. He leaves her for a large part of the movie to hang out with Tom, who he just met. So, but other than that, she seems like a pretty grounded individual, seems like a good person. I think at one point she travels somewhere, and I think Tom, after he's already killed Dickie, shows up all of a sudden someplace where she's staying. I think she's writing a book. And so I think for me, I wanted to use her character to represent, the beneficiary who is being productive, who is checking off all the boxes that are either in the trust agreement or in their parents' minds about what a beneficiary is supposed to be doing with their lives. And here, trust assets should be able to be used and typically are able to be distributed to help fund. And we talked a little bit about health, education, maintenance support. That's a standard. We talked about this a little bit in a prior episode. I think it was the Hangover episode. But you can listen to that if you want maybe a little deeper dive on, what HEMS means. Call it HEMS for short. Someone like Marge probably could have trust assets distributed to her because, again, she's likely exhibiting all the qualities of a productive beneficiary. And so when we are looking at in this context of actually furthering a beneficiary's lifestyle or helping them, it's the other side of the coin on, we talked about keeping assets from beneficiaries and providing the trustee with clear guidelines to, lock the assets up in some cases. Here, there are some steps that can be taken, or at least one step I want to focus on today, which is that in addition to just having the trustee distribute for health, education, maintenance support, you can name an independent trustee. An independent trustee is someone who isn't the beneficiaries themselves, isn't related or subordinate to them or the parents as the grantors. This independent trustee, because again, they're deemed to be independent, objective, no vested interest in benefiting from these assets in any way, they can be often appointed to distribute assets even above and beyond HEMS for any purpose. And so in Marge's case, if let's say she is writing this book and she needs funds because she's taking 2 years off to go and finish this novel or whatever she's writing, if for some reason the trustee doesn't feel comfortable because this maybe goes beyond, in their minds, HEMS, there may be an ability to appoint an independent trustee who in the trust document would be permitted to distribute for any purpose. And again, if you take this idea and you move it up to the discussion we just had about, Dickie and Freddie and Meredith, that's probably something you don't want, or Tom, because then, you can sort of skirt the restrictions in the trust. But again, this would be used and the trustee would proactively appoint this person. They don't have to be appointed when the trust is created. They can be appointed to go above and beyond HEMS because here you've got a good beneficiary who's, being productive and just needs, an extra, lifeline financially. Mm-hmm. And so Marge, I think she's a great representation of that. Any other comments on Marge? Yeah,
no, I agree with your comments and think that, that putting in place a special distribution trustee and also just having that flexibility built into the trust document can allow, consideration for sort of one-off extraordinary requests like travel or internships or special projects that still, ultimately align with the beneficiary's long-term goals. Exactly. Well, I want to move on to our final topic. When I was watching the movie again, that sort of the ending of the movie where, believing that Dickie is gone, Herbert, Dickie's father, decides to transfer the income from Dickie's trust to Tom. And this is a great segue to discuss the management of trust assets and investments briefly, because, with these trusts, and we're talking about, making distributions to beneficiaries and when the appropriate time to do so and who's got keys to it, and also guidelines for that trustee. A key component of trust is that the trustee's job, right, is to, and they have a duty under California law to not just maintain the assets of the trust, but to make them productive. And so I centered on this, that one kind of almost throwaway line that Tom is going to be set for his life because now he's getting this income from Dickie's trust. But I wanted to use that as a good segue to just talk about managing trust investments, making trust assets productive. Would you describe, your role at BBR and how you and your team might assist our, high and ultra high net worth clients with their financial
and investment strategies and related planning, what would you say to Herbert if he came to you and said, hey, I've got this trust, I've got assets in it. What would you say to him?
Sure. I think often our engagement with new clients begins with a need to understand what is the wealth for, and, who's it supposed to benefit, and what are this family's unique needs. So, working with the Greenleafs to understand that, then, we can begin to engage them with our investment advisory services. And, we're typically managing investments for families related entities like their revocable trusts, their IREV trusts, family limited partnerships, LLCs, their family offices or private trust company structures. And so we're not a trustee, but we are adept at helping them source a third party trustee and interacting with those trustees to create a really seamless experience to manage those assets for the beneficiaries of those entities. I would say that we take a very holistic approach to this. So not only are we building very customized asset allocations, selecting the managers for the portfolios, due diligencing those investments and monitoring them over time, we also want to help them integrate non-investment matters such as tax, trust and estate planning, cross-generational education, pre-sale business planning, and philanthropic strategies, to name a few. So really, helping them to simplify the complexity that typically comes with this level of wealth, and helping to do that in a way that's very customized to their unique situation.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think it's good to point out that your office and my office being different components of we represent different, spokes on the wheel that comprises, clients, professional advisors, and their team, on the legal side and on the financial side, that it's important for clients to have this set up and have quality advisors put in place that those advisors can act as one team and are all on the same page. Because how much more important or helpful would it be, as I'm planning for the Greenleafs, for example, if I know the overall family's investment strategy and what their overall objectives are, and then vice versa, right? It would be really important for you and your team to know if we're setting up, trusts and which may have different purposes and different beneficiaries, and rather than we've got this plan, but it's not closely coincided and tied in with your financial strategy. So really, really important for clients to consider that. Well, let's get finally to our verdict. Is this movie guilty, meaning a guilty pleasure, or not guilty? If it's guilty, you enjoyed the movie but feel guilty about it for any reason. If it's not guilty, you either disliked the movie or loved it, so it cannot possibly be a guilty pleasure. For me, very easy. It's not guilty. I don't think there's any way that this could be for me a guilty pleasure. I loved all the performances. I love, just like we mentioned earlier, especially the first part of the film before things sort of take a darker turn. Just that whole feel of, living this spontaneous life where you get to travel and eat good food and just enjoy Italy. So for me, not guilty at all. How about you?
Don't get me wrong. I do love this movie, but for me, it is a guilty pleasure.
Oh, you're going to zag on me. I would have never guessed that.
Jude Law was hands down my high school celebrity crush. So for that reason, it's a guilty pleasure. And now I'm blushing.
That's great. What we've learned today is that 1, trusts are a central component to any well-crafted estate plan. And there are proactive steps that can be taken to protect and help trust beneficiaries. As always, seek qualified legal, financial, and tax advisors who can assist. And 2, if someone you've never met tries to crash your vacation in Mongi, you should probably just say no. Gazelle, thanks again for joining me. I had a great time revisiting one of my favorite movies, and hope you did as well.
Likewise. Thanks, Hans.
I'm Hans Young with my guest, Gazelle Summe, Director of Portfolio and Wealth Advisor at BBR Partners. And you've been listening to The Verdict, Estate Planning Through Film, brought to you by the Private Client Group at Farella, Braun, and Martel. Thanks very much for joining us, and keep watching movies.